Bayview Hunters Point is a community hidden down in the southeast corner of San Francisco. It has primarily been a predominantly black community with a large proportion of black homeowners. In the last 3 decades, we've seen the population in Bayview Hunters Point fall from about 70% of the population down to 33.7%. Why are people leaving Bayview?
The population for African Americans in 1906 was just about 1,300. Afterwards, then just before World War II started, it got up to maybe around 5,000, but not quite. Afterwards, it was over 65,000 after World War II because of the recruit and putting them in San Francisco, putting them in over there at the Army base in Oakland, and over there in Richmond building the Liberty ships. So you had a tremendous influx. You had blacks. They recruited blacks because they didn't want that many blacks in the military. We don't want you Negroes knowing how to use a gun. You may shoot us, good white folks. And therefore they limit the number of blacks and to what type of work they can do. This is a picture here of Oscar James's mother in red and her grandmother is in blue. And they bought their home. She bought her home in 1938 on Palouse. She was walking the neighborhood because back then they had all black people living in public housing. We call them the projects. They didn't think that Oscar's grandmother could afford, she asked, how much is the house? Well, she had just left Texas, her and her husband, and they moved, they were living in public housing. She was walking the neighborhood, and she asked the realtor how much, and he told her a ridiculous price. She said, okay, I'll be back. She was back with a cashier's check from the bank for the property. The reason she had that kind of money is because she sold the rights to her property in Texas for oil. And that's how the James's family had money to purchase a home on Palouse Street. And they were the first black family in Bayview Hunters Point to buy a home in 1938. They had burnt down the Chinese here in 1939. And this is a picture of it. When they burnt down the fishing village, they used to catch shrimp out the bay. And they had 5 shrimp villages at Hunters Point. And Oscar played with the girl, Pat, and her dad bought the property for $1 after they burned the Chinese out. So they ran them out of Hunters Point. A. Philip Randolph, in 1942, threatened Roosevelt, the president, if you do not start paying black workers equal pay as you do a white male worker, we will go on strike and have the march on Washington. Roosevelt, since in 1942, that's just right after the Japanese had bombed, they didn't know whether they're going to shit, win, or whatever. He capitulated. So Bayview and the military complex was the first time they got equal black men, not women, but that was the first time black men had equal pay as white workers.
And A. Philip Randolph was the president of the Porters Union.
Yes, sir. Because remember, in Bayview, we were forced to live in Bayview. There was no open housing in San Francisco. They turned around and get the temporary and stuck them in trailers. Have those blacks that bought homes in Bayview, and where I studied at has the highest percentage of home ownership in Bayview. And I wanted that because I wanted to see the effects and look at the population in terms of exposure and what is the cancer rate and etc. And pulmonary disease and cardiovascular disease based on the exposure to chemicals and radiation. We found, sadly, radioisotopes in black people's urine that live by the Navy's base. We're still fighting World War II. The shipyard, their job was to make a determination what kills you quicker, uranium-235 or plutonium. Plutonium won out. Again, I was privileged to hear the testimony of one of the black workers that was there, and he talked about how he carried the animals on his back, is that they carried those animals. She said, when we did our radiation experiments, we poured the shit down the sink. Half of it went through the San Francisco sewage, and the other half went into a bay that they had a pipeline that went right into what they call Parcel F.
Question.
Yes, sir.
Where did these radioactive animals come from?
Oh, they experimented on them in Parcel D,
They
on the
actually
shipyard.
experimented.
Yes, they were experimenting which kills you quicker.
Plutonium dust or uranium dust?
Right, which one kills you quicker? They may have injected them. I wasn't all privileged. On Thomas, there are over 300 toxic waste sites in Bayview Hunters Point, which is only little under 3.5 miles, including the federal Superfund site on the shipyard, including a state Superfund site right adjacent to the shipyard on Thomas Avenue. And they had over 100 brownfields. That's where you have abandoned factories left in this neighborhood. So this is what this map reflects in terms of the pollution. And we walked every single block, so we know everything. They even had where they had the slaughterhouses at. They would even take the cattle and march them down 3rd Street. And the slaughterhouses would be around on Evans, and the glue factory up by the bay, on the opposite side of 3rd Street. Black folks had jobs. Then, when those industries leave, modernization, unemployed. The shipyard was the economic engine. And once they lost that, it never came back.
I've heard they called deindustrialization.
Yes.
As the beginning of ghettoizing a neighborhood.
Once the war started to wind down, last hired, first fired was in practice. They then fired and let go the black workers in large numbers. Understand that the men, when they were laid off, and you had the reform on welfare, it made it illegal for men to be living at the home and have the women receive a welfare check. Therefore, the men had to leave. And they were sleeping in the boxcars out there outside the base, so they cannot be accused, and the women can keep, and they can try and keep their family together, because they weren't hiring. Just like you go to Home Depot now and you see a lot of Latinos, you had that happening with black men all the way from Palouse all the way down to Market Street looking for work.
Day workers.
Day workers, the same thing. And no, weren't hiring you. If you get it, you're happy as hell. And crack cocaine invaded the black community. Those homes that my parents' generation died in those damn shipyards and industrial complexes to hand down to their children became property of the crack dealers. And they sold the shit off.
We're here today at City Hall to talk to San Francisco Supervisor Shaman Walton about what is happening in Bayview.
I think if you look at what's happening in Bayview Hunters Point, in terms of gentrification, there are a lot of factors that are at play. One, the high cost of living now. We are not paying wages that people can afford to live in San Francisco. And when you look at the fact that we have big tech industry folks or folks who have large means and are able to come into community, buy houses and push people out, that is something that has been a major factor in leading to gentrification. Plus the fact that we've had a little bit of where folks have owned homes in Bayview Hunters Point, black folks have owned homes in Bayview Hunters Point, and what happens is the matriarch, the patriarch, or they both pass away and pass on. They've had several children, and so instead of the family finding a way to maintain and someone live and stay in the home, they end up selling the home, and what happens is now you lose a piece of generational wealth. So if you get a few families that sell their homes, you couple it with the fact that people can't afford to live and buy homes in Bayview Hunters Point anymore, and then you look at the fact that the remaining black population that we do have here in San Francisco, a lot of folks are living in poverty. So the black middle class that existed in the Fillmore, Lakeview, and Bayview Hunters Point, you don't see the same anymore. Most of the black folks that are left behind are living in public housing or some type of rental subsidy or subsidy or rental assistance program.
In Bayview, since I can, as far back as I can remember, it has the best weather in the city. It has the best views in the city. So it has always been a focus to move African Americans out of the city, out of Bayview. It have the largest number of home ownership by African Americans was here, right here in Bayview. So as generations died on, grandparents, parents started to pass on, the younger set of people did not want to keep the property. They wanted to expand and go out. So we more than likely, we started with over 90,000 people out in San Francisco, and we are down a lot. And they're still moving out now more by force than by, they want, you know, you go out of town and the rents are a lot cheaper. Even it's difficult. It's difficult for our clients to even think about moving in, but having their own apartment. The 30% rent that they charge, or now we will never have housing for low income. Eventually, this neighborhood is going, unless we do something to stop the way it's going, this neighborhood will become a aristocratic area, period. You look up there on the hill, you have views of the whole Bay Area. This place is going away from us. It really is. Now it seems like everything is reversing. They have decided that we are not worthy to be in the city. So they're changing it, and gentrification is just part of it, and it's already begun. When I was young, coming out here, because I grew up in the Haight-Ashbury, but my grandmother stayed here. When I came coming out here, all up and down 3rd, you saw us. You saw stores, drug stores, the doctor's office. It was all kind of people running our business. You don't see that anymore. When I come in here now, I see basically all white folks walking up and down 3rd Street and acting like this is their neighborhood, which eventually it will be. Giving us a shelter where we can stop making a positive impact on the community. They shut it down. No, we aren't doing one in Bayview. Go someplace else, not in my backyard. We don't want them out here. They're here. They're here, and they're here because they don't have any place else to go. This is their neighborhood. This is where the majority of them were born and raised, and they don't have any place else. So they will be here in Bayview until something happens to change everything back around. People don't want to leave this neighborhood. Although they're fighting and they're doing everything possible to get rid of us, to act like we don't exist, we aren't leaving any place. We aren't going to leave. The clientele that we have here in this neighborhood, the residents can't afford really to get housing because it costs so much. I went and looked at a 6-bedroom garage apartment, and I mean, it was definitely in the garage in this neighborhood. They wanted $6,000 a month for a half completed garage, and we just can't afford that. The community wants beds to be here in Bayview for our clients, but the people with money, the business owners, went all out against us, so we lost the spot where we could have built in, and now we're in the process of trying to look to find someplace where we can build a shelter for homeless people. When I first started here, we were feeding like 150 people a day. I'm up to 450 people a day feeding, and they're all walks of life. They aren't just African Americans. Everybody is coming out here because they don't even have the money to feed themselves. So it's a problem.
What were the factors that contributed to the gentrification of Bayview Hunters Point? First, the shipyards created, starting in the 40s, very well-paying jobs for blacks who were recruited from the Deep South. These blacks bought homes in Bayview, so there was a large concentration of black home ownership. Plus, there was a solid network of black churches. Then, in '73, the shipyard closed down, and all of a sudden people were unemployed and had no work. And this followed by, in the '70s, by the crack cocaine epidemic that resulted in a large transfer of property to drug dealers who sold the property off. And more recently, the younger generation, the grandchildren of the people who bought the houses in the 40s, began to sell property because they wanted to move to larger homes that were more affordable in Pittsburgh, Concord, and Antioch. These factors resulted in setting up the neighborhood for gentrification. Derek Muhammad explains how gentrification works.
My name is Brother Derek Muhammad, West Oakland resident and member of Local 10. By definition, gentrification is the process of neighborhood change that includes economic change in a historically disinvested neighborhood by means of developing real estate that conforms to the standards of more affluent people. New higher income residents moving in, as well as demographic change, not only in terms of income level, but also in terms of changes in the education level and racial makeup of the residents. So when more affluent people move in, the value of a thing, the price of a thing increases, making it more unaffordable for the people who are already there to remain. A pushing out of the residents who are already there. To initiate the deindustrialization of a key urban center. Beginning in the 1970s and in the 1980s, we saw the deindustrialization of urban centers like Detroit, which, by the way, was one of the richest cities, not just in America, but in the whole world. Look at it now. We saw the deindustrialization of Pittsburgh, of Chicago, of Philadelphia, South Los Angeles, and even Oakland, California. We saw the decimation of manufacturing, warehouse jobs, factory jobs, and subsequent to that, beginning in 1984, 1985, 1986, we saw the introduction of crack cocaine in these urban centers. And that produced an economy predicated on drugs, whereby the drug business became the primary means of employment, replacing an economy based on industry. We suffered from that. Black families were annihilated from that. And if you don't have a family, you don't have a community. And so we can't go back to that, brothers and sisters.